Whispers of October. Part 1. The Silence of the House. The October wind swept gently across Milford, a quiet town tucked between hills painted in amber and gold. The leaves drifted down in slow spirals, covering sidewalks and gardens like a soft blanket of time. Inside a modest brick house on Willow Lane, Eleanor sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The silence was heavy here. It pressed against the walls, lingered in every corner, and echoed in the empty spaces where once there had been laughter. Her husband Henry's favorite chair remained by the fireplace, untouched since the day he was gone. A plaid blanket still hung over its arm, as if waiting for him to return and pull it across his knees on a chilly evening. Eleanor lived now in a world of echoes. The small creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of the curtains in the autumn breeze, all of it reminded her of what was missing. Dinner was no longer a shared ritual. It was a quiet plate at the kitchen table. The radio still played Henry's old jazz station, but without him tapping his foot to the rhythm, the music felt hollow. Every morning she followed the same pattern: tea, a short walk to the mailbox, a glance at the photographs on the mantel. She would pause longest at one picture, Henry standing with her at the county fair, both of them younger, smiling wide, their arms wrapped around each other. Life back then had seemed endless. Now, time moved differently, slower, heavier. October had always been their season. Henry loved the crunch of leaves beneath his boots, the scent of apple cider, the way the air carried both warmth and chill. Eleanor tried to hold on to that love of autumn, but this year the beauty felt muted, as though the colors had dulled without him beside her. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes as the wind outside rattled the windows. The world kept moving even if she felt like she had stopped. For Eleanor, October was no longer just a season. It was a reminder of change, of endings, and perhaps, though she could not see it yet, of beginnings, waiting quietly in the silence. Part 2. The October Market. The town square of Milford always came alive in October. The air was crisp, scented with cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and the sweet tang of apple cider. Stalls lined the cobblestone paths, their tables crowded with pumpkins of every shape and size, jars of homemade jam, and baskets overflowing with red and golden apples. Children laughed as they chased one another between the stands, their cheeks flushed pink by the chilly breeze. Eleanor hadn't planned to stay long. She had told herself it would be a simple errand, pick up a few apples, maybe a small pumpkin for the porch, and return to the quiet safety of her house. But as she stepped into the market, the swirl of voices, the warmth of neighbors greeting one another, and the rich colors of autumn surrounded her like a world she had almost forgotten. She moved slowly between the stalls, touching the rough skin of a pumpkin, inhaling the sharp sweetness of spiced cider samples offered by a smiling vendor. For a brief moment, she felt something stir, a flicker of belonging, though faint. And then she heard a voice. "Eleanor." She turned, startled. Standing just a few feet away was a tall man with silver in his hair and kind, searching eyes. It took her a moment, but then recognition softened her expression. "Samuel," she said quietly. He had been her high school teacher once, years ago. Later, she remembered, he had taught literature at the local college. Time had etched lines into his face, but his presence carried the same calm steadiness she recalled from her youth. "I wasn't sure it was you," he said, smiling gently. "It's been a long while." They exchanged a few words, small talk about the market, the season, the years that had passed. Samuel spoke of his love for books, how he still read poetry to his grandchildren, how October always reminded him of transitions, of stories unfolding. For Eleanor, the conversation felt like a small light breaking through her long, gray days. Brief as it was, it stayed with her. When they parted, Samuel tipped his hat, promising they'd see each other again. Eleanor walked home with her basket of apples, but more than fruit, she carried a new awareness, an echo of connection, something that whispered of change. Part 3. The Forgotten Journal. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual. The laughter and color of the market lingered in Eleanor's memory, yet once the door closed behind her, the stillness returned like an old shadow. She set the apples on the counter, placed a small pumpkin on the porch, and wandered through the familiar rooms. In the bedroom, she opened the closet to put away her coat. Her eyes fell on a worn cardboard box tucked in the corner, one she hadn't touched in years. With a deep breath, she pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed. Inside were pieces of Henry's life, old letters, faded photographs, and at the bottom, a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was scuffed, its pages yellowed, carrying the scent of time and memory. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Henry's handwriting filled the pages, steady and neat. At first, it was ordinary, notes about fixing the fence, planting tulips in the spring, buying Eleanor's favorite tea. But as she turned further, she discovered something else, dreams he had never spoken aloud. One day, I want to take Eleanor to the ocean at sunrise. We should spend more evenings sitting under the stars, not just talking about tomorrow, but living in today. If I go before she does, I hope she remembers that her laughter is the best sound this house has ever known. Tears blurred her vision as she read. Each line felt like Henry's voice reaching across the years, urging her not to retreat into silence, but to keep living the life they had once dreamed together. She closed the journal gently, pressing it against her chest. The weight of grief was still there, heavy and unyielding, but alongside it grew something new, a sense of guidance, as if Henry was still walking beside her, whispering through the pages. For the first time in many months, Eleanor whispered back into the empty room, "I hear you." And in that moment, surrounded by autumn shadows and the quiet rustle of leaves outside, she felt a small spark, a beginning she hadn't expected to find. Part 4. A Walk Through Falling Leaves. The next morning, the sun broke gently through the curtains, spilling golden light across Eleanor's kitchen table. The journal still rested there, its leather cover worn smooth under her fingertips. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying Henry's words, those quiet hopes he had left behind. They didn't feel like mere memories anymore. They felt like a call. On impulse, Eleanor put on her coat and scarf and stepped outside. The air carried the crisp bite of October, sharp enough to sting her lungs, yet strangely refreshing. She wandered toward the park, a place she and Henry had once walked together every Sunday after church. The paths were thick with fallen leaves, red and orange, crunching beneath her steps. For the first time in months, Eleanor didn't hurry. She let the cool wind brush her cheeks, let the rhythm of her footsteps steady her thoughts. Halfway down the trail, she noticed someone sitting on a bench beneath an old tree. As she drew closer, she recognized him, Samuel, with a book in hand, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up and smiled. "Eleanor, seems October keeps bringing us together." She returned his smile, a little shy. "It does seem that way." They spoke longer this time, the conversation flowing more easily. Samuel told her about his late wife, Margaret, how the first year after her passing had felt like walking through fog. "Grief," he said softly, "doesn't leave us, but it changes. Like the seasons, it shifts, and one day you realize you can breathe again. Eleanor listened, her heart both heavy and comforted. It felt strange and yet right to hear someone else put into words the very feelings she had carried in silence. They walked together through the park, their pace unhurried, their steps matched. Leaves fell around them in gentle showers, catching the sunlight like embers before settling on the ground. For Eleanor, the world felt a little less empty. When they reached the end of the path, Samuel tipped his head kindly. "Perhaps next time we'll share a cup of cider instead of just conversation." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She simply smiled, feeling something stir within her, uncertain, fragile, but alive. As she walked home, the sound of the leaves under her shoes seemed different, almost like music. For the first time in a long while, she realized she wasn't walking alone. Part 5. The Lantern Festival. As October deepened, Milford prepared for its annual Lantern Festival, a tradition that had filled the town square with light for generations. On the evening of the event, Eleanor wrapped herself in Henry's old scarf and carried the small leather journal in her bag. She wasn't sure why she brought it, only that it felt right. The square was alive with warmth despite the chill in the air. Strings of golden lights stretched between lampposts, stalls offered steaming cider, and children darted through the crowd, clutching paper lanterns glowing like captured stars. Music drifted from a small band at the corner. Soft fiddles, the hum of an accordion, the kind of sound that made the night feel timeless. Eleanor walked slowly, letting the festival's glow seep into her. She paused near a table where townsfolk decorated their lanterns with names, wishes, and quiet prayers. A volunteer handed her a small lantern, its surface pale and waiting. She hesitated, then opened Henry's journal. On a blank page near the back, she wrote with steady hand, "I will live for both of us now." Then, on the lantern itself, she traced a single word, hope. When the moment came, the crowd gathered by the river. One by one, lanterns rose into the night sky, lifting with the breeze, 1,000 points of light ascending like souls returning to the stars. Eleanor held hers close for a moment, whispering Henry's name before releasing it into the cool air. The lantern floated upward, its glow mingling with the others, until it was just one more star against the October darkness. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they carried not only grief, but release. Beside her, Samuel watched quietly, holding his own lantern. He didn't speak, but when their eyes met, Eleanor felt a shared understanding. They were both carrying losses, both learning, slowly, how to let the light guide them forward. As the lanterns drifted higher, Eleanor pressed the journal to her heart. For the first time, the silence within her didn't feel empty. It felt full of memory, of love, and of something new taking root. Part 6. Whispers of October. The days after the Lantern Festival felt different. The house was still quiet, the evenings still long, but the silence no longer pressed so heavily against Eleanor's chest. It was softer now, like a blanket instead of a weight. She began to notice small changes in herself. She lingered longer in the town square, chatted with neighbors she once only waved to, and even joined the local book club at Samuel's suggestion. The meetings were modest, 6 people gathered in the library's back room, but Eleanor found herself enjoying the sound of voices, the rhythm of shared stories. Samuel was often there too. They never spoke of replacing what was lost. Both of them knew grief wasn't something that disappeared. Instead, they shared cups of cider after meetings, traded memories of the ones they had loved, and found comfort in simply walking side by side. Their companionship was gentle, unspoken, like the steady warmth of a fire on a cool night. One evening, Eleanor stood by her living room window, a cup of tea warming her hands. Outside, the October wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the sound of rustling leaves. She closed her eyes and listened. It was as if the season itself was whispering, reminding her that life was still here, waiting to be lived. Henry's journal rested on the table nearby, no longer a relic of sorrow, but a guide, a quiet promise that love did not end with goodbye. Eleanor breathed deeply, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. For the first time in a long while, she felt steady, even hopeful. The whispers of October were no longer only about endings. They were about beginnings, too. And as she sipped her tea, watching the world turn golden and fade into dusk, Eleanor knew she was ready to walk into whatever tomorrow might bring.